chat. Just so you have a little idea of the agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of use cases first, and ways to use campaigns, and also ways that you can set up and customize campaigns a bit with the tools that you're given really as part of Salesforce itself and as part of the MPSP. And then we're going to look at some of the campaign limitations, I guess, or some of the things that can prove a little more tricky. And we're going to talk about some apps and some workarounds and things that can kind of power them and make them even more useful. So that's where we're going to go. But as I say, please, if you have questions, put them in chat as we're going along. The other thing, as I've already said, we have a lot of people on the call, and I know some of you are joining us from noisy offices. So please, could you keep your mic muted if you're not speaking or answering a question? Thank you for that. That's quite enough of me and the introduction. So I had, a few days ago, I'd asked the panel to think about some ways that we could kind of get the conversation going. And I started with a pretty general question, which was really just to ask, well, it was a kind of, what have you learned about campaigns that you'd recommend for others, or how do you use campaigns? And I got a pretty interesting range of answers. So I'm not sure who wants to kick off, but perhaps Deb, because you gave me the most detailed answer to how you use campaigns. So do you want to tell us a bit, Deb, about your organization? What do you use campaigns for?
Sure. So,
I know the short answer is everything, but perhaps perhaps a little more detail.
So I work for the Cutaneous Lymphoma Foundation, and we're a patient advocacy organization for a rare form of cancer. And so probably about a year ago, we really overhauled how we used campaigns with the specific intention, because we wanted to be able to track our donations better, what drove our donations, and we had kind of like put them all in a general bucket, and our development person, it wasn't giving her enough information. So I took a deeper look at campaigns and how they could be used. Trish Perkins wrote a really amazing blog called The Magic of Salesforce Campaigns that was really helpful and kind of gave me some direction and where to start and kind of how to develop the campaign structure that we use now. And
are you happy to show us a little bit?
Yes, yeah. I wasn't sure if and can I go ahead and make myself a presenter?
Yeah, okay. Well, here you go. I'm going to send, so you may just have to do a quick download. So I think you were saying, as you get ready, that you have the idea of a hierarchy, and I was interested in what you were saying about how you can compare what's going on from one fiscal year to another. So
sure. Okay, so I'll show you. Our hierarchy is really lengthy, but it works and while it may seem kind of overwhelming, it works really, really well for organizing our campaigns and then at the end of the day, kind of tracking the donations, because of the roll-ups on the campaigns, the campaign hierarchy, and I don't have a report that I can show you directly that would kind of well, if I stop and think a second, I probably do have a report that I could show you where there's a comparison between the different fiscal years. But so for each fiscal year, I have a hierarchy set up very similar to this, where my third tier is always consistent about what's in this level, so that I'm comparing apples to apples from year to fiscal year. But one of the other things that I did in this process is I was trying to make one campaign record type work for everything, and I found out really quickly, like, it just made a mess of my layouts because I had a lot of custom fields and I had a lot of items on my pick list. So one of the things I did just to kind of wrap my head around it all was did a spreadsheet of what campaign types we typically use, what their purpose is, and why might I need to customize them. And then from that, I determined what kind of custom record I was going to create. In Salesforce Bin has a really good blog on the difference between when to use a record type versus a page layout. And that was really helpful for determining that if I wanted my pick list to be customized, then I was gonna have to create actual record types. I couldn't just do that using a page layout. So then I can do then a couple different types of campaigns that different layouts. For example, this is our event campaign, and I've done a lot of custom fields. The event and venue details are all custom. The attendance details are all custom. And just as a point of reference, the LE here stands for live event because we also have webcasts, and I have a custom record type for webcast too because we capture different information on that. So this was a way that I could keep the record types pretty succinct. So for an event, we're capturing like our event details, and additionally, I can choose here what event type it's going to be, and this kind of helps determine what my campaign members' statuses are. And I know Megan's going to talk a little bit about using AAKonsult to do that, which we use also. And then here I can use what type of, and again, that kind of helps determine where this then lives under the hierarchy. And then you can compare that then to, this is one of our fundraiser campaign record types. And because this is a fundraiser record type, then what shows up in my type of records, or what type of fundraisers, is this list is way different than like for my event. And then the type of event, again, that's a different pick list, which I wouldn't be able to do with just a plain, changing the page layout. I had to create a record type in order to do that. And then I know, Caroline, you had asked for me to show also how I would join a campaign. And typically, if I'm just adding a single person to a campaign, I just go to their campaign record and add them. We use Click and Pledge for our event management. And what's really nice, if you use Click and Pledge, you can say in your event management where your registrants, where you want, what campaign you want them to be associated with. So every time somebody registers, the attendee and their guests, they are automatically added to my event campaign. So we don't have to do that manually. And because I've got the membership statuses set up, it automatically attributes the correct status to them as well. So if I wanted to add myself to a campaign, I would just go to the campaign history, go to add to campaign. I created just a little cheat campaign. And here again, I have some custom fields on my campaign membership because I only use one record type here, and depending on what type of campaign it is, I might need some additional information. But for this, for an event, pretty much I just want to know that I've been registered. So I go ahead and hit save. And that's it, kind of in a nutshell. And if you like, I can try to pull up a report that shows the differences between the campaigns.
I think actually what I was just looking at some of the chat that's been going on, and thank you, this is great, Deborah. I think people are quite interested in how you set up your hierarchy. Could we go back to that? Because I think your hierarchy is very sophisticated, and it would be kind of interesting, I think, to let people have another look at that, and perhaps talk a little bit about these levels and what's at the different levels, and
Sure.
and maybe, Anne, we can bring in some of this conversation about this idea of the sibling campaigns. Because one of the very first questions that was asked in chat is if you can get more than 5 layers deep in a campaign, in the campaign hierarchy. Are you using all of the layers here, Deb? How deep do you go?
I go to 5 levels, and unfortunately, you can't really go any deeper than that. So there have been a few campaigns where I really might want a campaign to fall underneath that 5th level. I've had to bring it up an additional level. In an occasion that happened just recently is that again, using Click and Pledge, doing a fundraiser through them, it would also automatically create a campaign level. Well, I was getting errors because the campaign that I associated it to, if it automatically created a fundraising campaign, it was going to bump it. It was going to go beyond the 5 levels, just because of how deep I was already associating it. So that's something to keep in mind when you're, if you're using other apps connected to your campaigns, that if they generate campaigns on their own, to make sure they're up in a higher tier. It might. So my very first level is my fiscal year, and then it's broken down. The second tier is like the big bucket top tier. So like our and we track pretty much almost everything. We try to in Salesforce, and then we try to use the campaigns just as much as possible to track it. So these would be like our pretty much top tier levels. So the admin, advocacy, the annual fund campaigns, and then this is kind of a good example of then the next level is in, I just recently added this, and that's why that it's not named, the naming is a little different than the others, but we wanted to look at what are our major ways that we raise funds or funds come into us in our annual fund campaign. So then we broke it out into the fundraisers, our appeals, board giving, etc. And then under the appeals, well, we want to be able to track each appeal that come, we send out 3 different appeals, and we wanted to be able to track those. Plus then any fundraisers, like this year we've just done this Just fundraiser, which is a social media fundraiser, but it kind of falls under our annual fund campaign appeals. So each appeal would have its own campaign, and then underneath that, I have the mailing list, and then these are the fundraising pages through Click and Pledge. And the reason I do a mailing list separate is I don't, because we do so many mailings and frequently there can be anywhere to several hundred to a few thousand people on the mailing list. If you add all those people as members to your campaigns, you are really going to suck up your server space really, really quickly in Salesforce. And so what I've done is typically I run a campaign mailing list report and send it, put that into an Excel spreadsheet, and then just attach the spreadsheet to the campaign. If it's a smaller smaller mailing, then I'll just leave the campaign members. But when it's those big ones, they add up really quickly. So then just kind of scrolling down just to give you, here's all of our patient programs broken out by type of program. Again, kind of like the annual fund campaigns, the newsletters are broken out by the issues. And what makes it nice is then if I go up here to this campaign, I can see here how many throughout the whole hierarchy for the newsletters, this is how much we've raised thus far. So that's where it gets really nice using the tiered levels, is that you can look at each tier to see what your donations are versus like your budget costs and actual costs.
That's great. And we're getting some comments and questions about this attaching the spreadsheet for the mailings. Can you just talk a little more about that?
Sure. Actually, I think I just attached mine. So for Portland here, I have excuse me, I have my mailing list, and the other reason I've got this is that we keep track of how many people that we have actually mailed out to. So I'll put in a hard number here, but then here's my actual mailing list here that we use Dropbox just to kind of save on server space. Plus we can save all different types of files in Dropbox. But here is my actual mailing list that I sent to our mailing house with the contact names and addresses. So should somebody, if we have a question about, you know, did so-and-so receive this mailing, were they on that mailing list? It takes an extra step, but we can just open up the spreadsheet and quickly look, and it will save you significantly in memory space.
That's yes, I think there are a lot of people thinking that that's a really great idea. Fantastic. And for those of you who were here at the beginning and heard Deb give credit to her thoughts about organizing the hierarchy to Trish Perkins, Trish, thank you. You were on the call as well, and she's posted the link to the blog post that that Deb talked about. Let's see, there's a question. Judy had one question, which is about reporting on a single level. For example, she said only the third tier, which might mean appeals in an annual fund. I suspect Judy's meaning, how would you kind of compare perhaps from year to year?
Sure. So if you give me 1 second, I think actually, I think I have a dashboard that I did that.
And otherwise, Megan, Michael, do you have any comments on this? Do you use campaign hierarchy in other ways, or are there other things that you do with campaigns that you'd like to mention? I know, Michael, you had quite an interesting idea of this, of a sort of campaign being a kind of holding place for maybe some data that you needed to deal with. I liked your idea of these temporary campaigns. Do you want to just explain a little more about that?
Sure, yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, so we occasionally run into, small or maybe not so small list of people with a certain data problem. And maybe you have time to deal with it right then, and maybe you don't, or maybe you just want to keep track of it, or keep track of that this data problem happened to this group of people. And so I usually will either have whoever's reporting that to me or myself just put those people in a campaign. That way we get some transparency to the fact that this problem happened to these people, and then we can still fix the problem. But again, have that transparency. It certainly doesn't it will impact your data storage in the way that Deb was talking about. But the fact that we have visibility to the fact that this problem affected these people outweighs that, I guess, and it's usually not that big a list. So that's one completely other way to use campaigns.
And I guess the data storage thing is that it incentivizes you to deal with the problem quite soon, so that you're not taking up too much storage, doesn't it?
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, yeah. The other thing I would say about data storage with campaigns is that they take up less space per record than normal records do. It's just sort of important to recognize that. And so, you know, we certainly keep an eye on our data storage, but you'll notice that you can have a lot more campaign members' records than you can, and have it take up less storage in your org than other objects.
That's great. That's a good, yes, it is a good point. But it's interesting, like you were saying, Deb, it's actually, although the records take up less space, then it's still, particularly when you're doing a lot of mailings, just ends up being a lot of records, doesn't it? So it's still interesting, I think, to have to have a bit of thought perhaps, and a sort of strategy about how much you want to use campaigns and how many campaign members you need, and how long you need to keep those reports.
Right, and the other consideration is if you know, we've been using campaigns since we started using Salesforce in 2011. So some people might have been in many campaigns, and so to the extent that your staff are using campaign history as a way to sort of see what things we're sending to people, after a certain point, it's an unusable list of things. So we'll definitely be talking about the spreadsheet idea for things that are more than probably a couple of years ago.
So I was able to find the report, Caroline, and so on one of my on these campaigns, their campaign type is actually fiscal year category 3, which is a pick list value that I created. So I did a summary report based on campaign type, and then that the value in the donor, because I just wanted to see what campaigns brought in dollars. So the donations were greater than 0, and we also tracked in kind, but I didn't want that to skew my totals. So and then I grouped them by fiscal year. So it goes back a few, but here's like our most recent. So you can do a nice comparison between your fiscal years about what areas are bringing in the most dollars, or whatever it is you're choosing to track. And then the nice thing is that you can kind of, you know, you can start funneling down into each of those tiered levels to kind of see, for example, like the third-party fundraiser. Well, how many fundraisers is that in which fundraiser did the best? What kind of fundraiser? It's a nice way to kind of take a top tier look and then kind of funnel down.
Megan, you've just made a great point in chat about campaign naming. Do you want to speak a little more to that? Because I think it's a very important point, actually. It's how you name campaigns.
No, and Deborah probably doesn't see the chat going, but basically I was like, I love the way she's naming this, because one of the things that happens when you have a ton of campaigns and you're usually like you're entering in a donation and maybe the campaign doesn't get populated automatically, you have to find it in the search bar, and it's impossible if people name them any sort of, you know, gala, something. So if you start with the year in a consistent way, whether it's fiscal year 2015 or just 2015, whatever it is, I would definitely recommend that, because it will save you later. That's awesome. Thanks, Deborah, for showing that.
Yes, and thank you, Judy. I'm glad that's the information that you were looking for. Okay, we can and somebody else is saying we use fiscal years as well, and it makes it very easy. And I think that it's great how you've also defined those types, Deb, because I think that gives you another way to slice and dice the information, and particularly when you want to compare across fiscal years. I think it's really great to have those very clearly defined types. A question from Ashlyn, which I wonder if one of the panel could take up. Can I copy members from one campaign to another? Anybody want to just tackle that one quickly? Can you copy members from one campaign to another?
I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Deb. No, go ahead.
Oh no, I think there is an app out there that will let you do that, but native to Salesforce there isn't, except you can build a campaign report for those members, and then use the button up at the top to add them to another campaign from the report. If that, I don't know if I'm saying that clearly enough or not, but it's kind of a workaround to do it, but there's not just like a really easy quick button push where you can shift them over to the another group, another campaign.
It looks like folks are putting the campaign combiner app in there too, and I can just go over. Caroline, I spun up a new trial. I was like, so I do have something to show that's super basic because there's no data in there, but I can show just kind of, there's like 4 kind of basic ways that you can add somebody to a campaign. So I can show some of that as well.
Fabulous. Over to you then. Megan.
Okay.
But that's great. Okay. All right. Well, while you're just figuring that out, an interesting question from Rachel, which I think follows on from some of what you were showing, Deb. She's asking, what is the advantage to actually grouping campaigns? We recently migrated, and none of our campaigns are grouped. Presumably they're campaigns in the legacy system. So, Deb, obviously you've spent a lot of time and effort trying to structure your campaigns and put them into that hierarchy. And what sort of advantages are you seeing from having put that together?
I think the biggest advantage, well, 2 immediate advantages is one, just organization, that it, like if 2 campaigns have a connection to each other and you're using the parent campaign field to build those connections, it helps organize it. So which makes it a whole lot easier if you go to the hierarchy to find your campaigns. And the other, probably even more importantly, is by building that hierarchy, then you get the hierarchy roll-up totals. So if you are like connecting your donations to campaigns, then they'll roll up from like the primary campaign on your opportunity up to then that next level. So for instance, for me, it's like issue 1 of the newsletter brought in so many donations. Well, but overall, how many donations did our publications come in? Well, if the newsletter is a child campaign to my publications campaign, along with whatever other publications I have, I can go to that main parent campaign, and right there is my number. So if you use roll-ups, that using the hierarchy really gives you a lot of information at a glance versus having to build a report to find that information.
Yes, fantastic. And also as, so yes, it's great, isn't it, within categories, and also as Trish has pointed out, it's that being able to compare like to like across time. So again, yeah, that's one of the things I like about your structure, Deb, is that you're able to group sort of types and categories, but you are also able to do some grouping across time, and you can sort of see the path up through a fiscal year, but then you can look at the path for a different fiscal year, and do those kinds of comparisons as well, which is great. And you're doing a great job of helping Julia out with the fact that Julia's fiscal years have changed, and so she's having to rewrite all her campaigns. We feel your pain. We feel your pain, Julia. That's not easy at all. Megan, sorry, are you? Would you like to take it away? And I know, yes, you were going to talk about a couple of different apps, I think, that make.
Yeah, I realized I thought I was sharing. It says I'm sharing, but I don't see my screen.
So we can see your screen, so that's fine.
Oh, you can?
Yes.
All right.
We can.
Awesome. Okay. So I wanted to talk about just like, what are the ways you can add somebody to a campaign? This is in Lightning, so this is just a quick demo org, so not everything's in here. But the first way is just to go to here to the actual campaign itself and to go to campaign members, and you can add folks this way. And this is the great part about one of the new Lightning pieces, is that it shows you kind of some of these list views. So that's the second way that both in Classic and Lightning you can add people to a campaign. So you can select everyone here and you can add them to the campaign that way. And you can also select the member status at that point, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about the member status. And then the third way, and I forget if this is available in Lightning yet, I think it is actually. Let's see, I don't have any demo reports in here. All contacts maybe. And then the third way, great, yay, it's available now in Lightning, is to add to campaign from a report. And so this is when there was a question asked, can you add people from one campaign to another campaign? And this is how you would do it. You would basically sort by campaign members from the report and add it to the campaign. So those are the three ways, from the campaign screen itself, from a list view, from a report, and then also directly from the contact record, which is what Deborah showed in the beginning. So those are the ways. And I believe like total safe harbor, but I feel like there was talk of some very similar to Campaign Combiner, the free app, that there was some functionality coming down the pike to slice and dice people into campaigns similar to Campaign Combiner. But like, safe harbor, I don't know. I feel like I heard rumors of that at some point. I know you can do that with Marketing Cloud. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was campaign member status. And this is something that currently you can only do in Classic. So if you look at Trisha's blog was a great one, because it talked about how you could use this as like a event management tool, like RSVP yes, RSVP no, and start to track people in that group. But currently there's no way to actually update the campaign member status records here like you can in Classic. So if you are on the Lightning version, this is kind of one of the things that you have to switch over to Classic for. So if you switch over to Classic and you go to your test campaign, if you hit the advanced setup button, then you can actually edit these default campaign member status values, and just say, sent invite, RSVP yes, and RSVP no. And this is great for all kinds of things. Events particularly is a great use case, but all kinds of things that you want to do for tracking campaign members. Oh, come on. Oh, because it won't let me, this is actually good to demo stuff live, because then you see the errors. It won't let me change a campaign member status if someone's already assigned to it. So some of these things you're going to get, you're going to run into if there's somebody in that campaign with that member status, it won't let you update it. So why do we care? What else could we use campaign member statuses for? So oftentimes I'll have a client that's working on kind of like a year-end mailing, and they want to segment content. And the great part about campaigns is it dedupes within the campaign. So it won't let one person be a part of a campaign more than once. So it'll say, like, if it adds it to the campaign, it'll basically just kind of combine them with the values that they were in there before, which is fantastic for mailings, because I don't know about you, but I've gotten a bunch of kind of year-end mailings from different nonprofits where you essentially get on their list more than one time. They pull 2 different reports, and all of a sudden you're getting 3 letters, and you feel like they're not good stewards of your money. So, you know, depending on your list size and what your mailing is, you can actually do your segmentation using campaigns. So you might have, and so one way of using campaign member status is to actually use these as segments. So for example, let's say you want to have like your board members get 1 letter, and you want to have your volunteers get another letter, and then you just have like your general letter. You can actually use these as your different member status records to be able to segment people within the campaigns. So, and then of course you want donated. I'm going to talk about retaining these member status values in a second.
Yeah, because I was going to say, it's really great, isn't it, that you can create all of these, but there is a disadvantage, isn't there? Yeah, there we go. You need one of them to be responded. Okay. So yeah, what's the problem about this really cool way of setting up these campaign status?
Totally.
Well, so do it in Lightning.
Well, yeah. So one of the things is like, so if let's say you want to like you have a different letter for board members and a different letter for volunteers and just like a letter for everybody else, and you want everybody to get one of the 3 letters. You can use campaigns to kind of segment those folks, and you can run reports and kind of assign them to different levels of content. But based on a sprint that happened, I guess like 2 years ago, now if somebody donates, their member status value will automatically get updated to donated, which is fantastic, except if you want to retain their member status value for what segment they were in, right? To be able to talk about like, oh, how many of the people that were in the board who got that fancy board member letter actually donated. So you may want to create a custom field that you can essentially like transfer the value of this field before you actually send it out, just to retain what their legacy member status is, if you want to take a look at that segmentation, because this is just kind of like out of the box, helps you make sure that everybody is getting only 1 letter.
But I think where I was going with this, Megan, is that the problem is that that's great for a campaign, isn't it? But it's like, how do you retain those statuses when you want to do this next year or with the next campaign?
Oh, like what do you do next year if you want to like replicate this?
Yeah.
Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
That's where I'm going, because of course there's the other problem about these wonderful custom status, isn't it? Which is they just don't stick.
They don't stick. So what do you do? So like every time, so basically in standard Salesforce, let me see actually, because I'm wondering, I can't remember if you can clone a campaign in Lightning. So we're gonna find out. So one of the things about if you just create a new campaign, and any kind of campaign, it's just going to basically like another campaign. It's going to start over again, and it's going to give you that sent and responded values. So if you try to add somebody here, it's going to be like, great, add this person. But it's going to just, oops, I forget what it was. It's going to just like default to these regular sent and responded values, but we don't want that, right? Like we would spend all this time working on our segments, and we want to like retain that information. So there is a way to clone a campaign, and that will allow you to clone the campaign member statuses values that you had. So I think I was in this one. Let's see if we can do this. looks like we can clone this one. So if we clone this campaign, which is a really good thing to do, it'll clone the campaign member status values as well. Is that kind of what you were talking about, Caroline?
Absolutely, yeah.
But there's another problem though, is because you have like 14 different people on your team and like everybody's creating their own campaigns, and some people say yes for the campaign member status and some people say RSVP yes, and then all of a sudden you have 45 different campaign member status values in your setup menu. Seriously, because this is like one of the places in Salesforce where essentially anyone can create new values. It's like almost creating new field values, but you don't realize it when you're doing it. So one of the apps that many of us like to use that is free is called AAKonsult. And I just installed it really quickly. And the advantage of this is that it creates those campaign member status values for you for new campaigns only. It doesn't go back in time, but for new campaigns, it'll say like once you set those default status values by campaign type, it'll say like, okay, this is a type event, so it'll only give me RSVP yes, RSVP no, hasn't responded yet. So this is great. And there's like a documentation tab here. This is a free app, so you can install it in your sandbox and check it out. But I just created this sample one campaign type conference. And then in here, you can see I started to create the campaign member status values for this, RSVP no. And then you can create a new campaign member status value here. And this is another way to get around the lightning constraint of campaign member status values and also create some consistency in your data. One thing that I'll say is like, it's based on this campaign type. These campaign statuses are based on the campaign type field. I immediately thought campaign record type, like Deborah was talking about, which I think are great ways to track different types of campaigns. But in this case, for this app, it's actually the type field and not the record type, which can kind of trip you up sometimes.
I know, it's interesting, isn't it? Because often when you start using campaign, it's the field you don't really do anything with is type, isn't it? It's you tend to think about the record types and almost ignore type. But it's interesting, yes, that works that way. But then type, as you were showing us, Deborah, can come in really useful as well as a reporting tool. So that app must have been really helpful for you too, Deb, because you've got such a variety of different campaigns and record types and things. I'm sure you've made very good use of that app.
Yeah, I use it as well. The only campaign type that I found that it does not work with is the volunteer campaign. That's part of the Volunteer for Salesforce. In my workaround, if you want to use AAKonsult for that, is that I would create the campaign first as just a default campaign and get the statuses that I wanted, and then switch the record type to the volunteer, and the member statuses would stick. But if you create your volunteer campaign originally as a volunteer campaign and want specific status types,
Oh, that's great. That's a very cool tip. Thank you very much. And I think, yes, it sounded like your audio just blipped out slightly, but that's a great tip. No, thank you very much for that. So I'm just looking, an interesting question from Julia, which anyone could pick up, but Michael, maybe I'll throw it at you first since you haven't had as much to say yet. How would you capture one person with multiple roles at an event? So she's interested because she's got sponsors who also may be vendors at a trade show. She's got speakers, they may also be vendors. Any thoughts on this idea of multiple roles within a campaign?
Thanks, Caroline.
Sorry, Mike. Well, it doesn't have to be you then. Everybody else on the panel got thoughts.
No, I did see that, and I was scratching my head about it because, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess you could have, typically in general, when we have the issue of one record needing to be sort of tagged with multiple things, you know, the shiny thing in the room is the multi-select pick list, and we all know how bad that is. So, you know, one fairly simple option would just be a series of checkboxes that you put on the campaign member record. That could be a little daunting from a data management perspective to keep track of all that stuff, but I believe I've seen any custom field that you add to the campaign member record will show up when you import records, and I think you can have it show up when you add people to campaigns directly. I'm not sure that without testing it though. Those are my thoughts.
Go on, Megan, you're giving him a +1. So have you used checkboxes on campaign member records?
Well,
Yeah, I think, I mean, for like you want campaign member status to do like one thing and one thing only. So it's like either it's like the segment that mailing is getting, or it's like their attendee status, right? But then I would have exactly what Michael said, like separate values. It's like, are they attending, yes or no is the campaign member status. And then like, are they a VIP? Check the box. Are they a presenter? Check the box. All on the campaign member status, custom fields on the campaign member status record. That's a mouthful, but yes, I agree with Michael.
Yeah, and the consideration, if you were going to create combo statuses that said, you know, attendee / sponsor / vendor, is that then if you want to report on people who are, if you want to have a nicely grouped report, that sort of blows that away, as would a multi-select pick list. So it sort of depends. I mean, like with any other hard question, it comes down to what do you really want to have in the end. And so if most people are going to be attendees, for example, and, you know, 4 of them are sponsors and 3 of those are vendors, then I think, you know, something simple like checkboxes, just so you can keep track of it, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and then like Megan suggested, you're keeping the idea of the status to the, you know, are they coming? How did they RSVP? Did in the end they actually attend, or did they say they were coming and then didn't, etc. That's that. And Megan's saying
Yeah,
same.
exactly.
Yeah, for dietary preferences as well. Yeah, keep those out of the status. That's great. Okay. I think, let's see, we have 10 minutes. I think we've picked everybody's question. Okay, so I will throw it back to you, Michael. You had one of the things that you were suggesting was that of a way of kind of getting a bit more visibility. Do you want to talk about the custom report link and why that's helpful?
Yeah, you mean the report link on the campaign that I was talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is a fun little formula. It's not really a hack. I mean, it works fine. It took a while for it to work in Lightning, but it does now. So the idea is you create a formula field, and I can show this if you want to pass presenter to me.
Yeah.
But the idea is to essentially create a formula field on your campaign. Yeah, I'll just wait for it up.
Yeah, because there is a one of the things this helps to get around is that it's very hard to customize the campaign member list, isn't it? The related list as it appears on campaigns.
Exactly. That's exactly where this came from. There's a I can't remember the name of it because we've hidden it from our page layout. There's a standard campaign report link that shows up in the custom links section of the campaign page, I believe. But that report isn't very customizable or useful, especially if you start getting into custom fields and things like that. So what we did is we created a standard report using the campaigns with contacts report type, and just put one filter on it that is campaign ID equals and put one in. And then you create a custom field, formula field on a campaign record itself that looks just like this hyperlink thing at the top here. And this right here is the link to your report. So you need to go to the URL when running the report. And yes, you have to do that part in Classic right now. And then this little PVO thing, that means that's sort of the little bit of code that says, this is the first filter in the report, and we're passing in the ID of the campaign that we're on. And then these words here are campaign member status. That's the words that show up on the page, as you can see right here. And when you click on it, it opens in a new window. So I can demo that very quickly. So here is our formula, and I've put that on this campaign. And so it shows up on the page like this, and you click on it, and it just runs a campaign member report for everyone just in this campaign. Yeah, it didn't used to work in Lightning. So I actually wrote this up as a best practice nugget like 2 years ago, I think, right before Lightning came out. And then people were like, does it work in Lightning? And no, it didn't, and now it does. So I don't know what happened to best practice nuggets. Does Caroline remember those? They kind of
I do remember those, but yes, absolutely.
They're still out there if you have the URL, but
No, I mean, this is very useful. I think particularly when you're customize, particularly for things like events. And if you do have all of those, we were talking about that idea of checkboxes for different, the way that people are involved with, particularly with event campaigns. And this is really the way to do it, isn't it? Because you can't add all those checkboxes neatly into your campaign member related list. I mean, you're probably going to want a lot more detail. And this is a great way to do that, isn't it?
Yeah, the other thing, so a little related version of this is we do a lot of wealth screening with Wealth Engine, and they have a very specific type of format that they need the report to be in when you send it to them. And so I've created a report with that format and built a link like a similar thing for this, so that when our research person needs to run a wealth screening report, she can just click a button, put people in the campaign, click this link, export it, and away she goes.
Fantastic. I'm glad we had time to include that, because I think it's a really great tip. And yeah, there's at least one person going, whoa, when you posted that, Michael. So, okay. So yes, people are saying, where can we find this formula? That's really cool.
Yeah, I'll post it to the hub afterwards.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed.
Or, I mean, my best practice nugget still lives out there. Should I post that link? Or
if you can find the link to the best practice nugget, then yes, please post it into chat or into the Hub office hours group or whatever. That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's out there. It's just very quickly, the instructions talk about doing it from like a custom event object. So you'd have to just extrapolate a little bit, but I'll post something.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michael. Julia, yeah, we're all going to have to get to Lightning eventually, I think. I like it, Megan, that you say Lightning has lots of joyful bits, and I think it's interesting, isn't it, how a lot of these things that we've been kind of waiting for are beginning to come into Lightning. The add to a campaign button in a report, and as you were saying earlier, Megan, being able to clone campaigns, that kind of thing. These things are all appearing in Lightning and making life easier. Okay, a few more. There's a video on passing the report URL through Lightning, trying to find it. Thank you, Anne. Yes, great. If you find it before the end of the session, please post it in this chat. And if not, come back to the office hours group. Did I miss anybody's questions, or has anything occurred to anybody? Okay, we're getting the links, which is great. So that's fantastic. So I think, oh yeah, and Julia's saying this use of Dropbox. This is great. I think there are some really interesting best practices that we've just alerted here. Deb, I think your your structure and your use of the hierarchy has given people a lot of inspiration. That's great. And obviously people really like this idea of attaching a spreadsheet for these mailing campaigns. It's interesting. It prompts the whole idea and the question about how long to keep the data. Thank you, Michael, for the formula and also for that idea of campaigns as a temporary holding place. And thank you, Megan, for talking about the whole business of status. And yeah, I like that idea. I like that idea that you had of the of using the status as a way to segment the campaign members. And it gets us into a whole interesting conversation about what status does. So, and thank you, those of you who have been posting links as we went along. So,